Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. On this podcast, we talked about all things to increase muscle, improve performance, better body composition, and do all of it without destroying your health in a flexible framework. On the podcast, we've got my friend Kristi Storoschuk, and she is a PhD candidate in exercise physiology. Published a great review about Zone 2 cardio training, and that's exactly what we're talking about today. So a big part of her research is looking at Zone 2 cardio. She's also looking at different components of metabolic flexibility for mitochondrial adaptations and how different training intensities affect recovery and long-term performance. So I really enjoyed this conversation. We'll link to her previous podcast that we had here. She had some great stuff there. So in this one, we're talking about just a little bit of how do you set up Zone 2 stuff? What exactly is it? How does lactate affect it? Do zones really matter? Training, kind of sort of the origins of where Zone 2 came out, intensity differences, and even talk a little bit about frequency, how you set that up, mitochondrial changes, and even some stuff on lower intensity things such as walking. So make sure to check out all of her great stuff. We'll put a link down below to her Instagram and all of her wonderful stuff. And again, if you want to hop on to the Fitness Insider newsletter, I'll have a link for my stuff down below. And then we also have the Flex 4. So I asked her if someone is a recreational lifter listening to this and want to get better at aerobic fitness, what would be her rapid fire top 4 tips? You can get that exclusive content. If you're already on the Fitness Insider, you'll get that automatically sent to you right away. If not, you can hop on to the Flex 4 down below, and you'll get her 4 top tips there. And you'll get a ton of previous top 4 tips from previous podcast guests. That content only goes out to the newsletter insider subscribers, and it's completely free to join. So this was a great discussion. As you know, I'm not the world's biggest fan of Zone 2 training. But what's nice about podcast formats is you get to talk to experts who are looking at this in the lab, and you get to have a long conversation to get into some of the nuances and details because, like all things, context does matter. So, huge thanks to Kristi for doing this. Greatly appreciate it. Also, want to give a shout out. She will be at the International Society of Sports Nutrition Conference coming up in June down in Florida. I believe she'll be giving a talk there. I'll also be there giving a talk. So we'll put a link to the ISSN below if you're looking for a nerdy conference to go to. Tons of stuff related to exercise physiology, definitely more on the supplementation, nutrition side. Just a really, really fun event. I've been attending and presenting at the ISSN since, 2011, 2010. I think the first time I attended was like 2008, which is kind of crazy. So we'll put all that information down below. So without further ado, here's a discussion with Kristi all about the pros and cons of Zone 2 training. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you today?
Hi, Mike. It's a pleasure to be back. Honored as always. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm going to link to your previous one. And today we're talking all about the awesome paper you posted and written about Zone 2 cardio. It seems to be everything in fitness appears to be one extreme to the other. I think we went through the phase of, Zone 2 is going to cure everything. And now it feels like we're in the phase of Zone 2 is stupid and worthless. And yeah, I wanted to have you on the podcast to talk about that. What made you want to write the paper that you did, which we'll link to?
Well, the motivation behind the paper, like you, I'm sure, is that we heard about Zone 2 through like podcasts and the social media and proponents of Zone 2 back in I think it was 2016 when it was starting to come out and I started to learn about it. And I was like, oh, well, it was positioned as we need to do lots of low intensity zone 2 training because that's where we are at our peak fat oxidation. And so if we're peak fat oxidation, we should be training our mitochondria because that's the site of fat oxidation to become better fat burners, and becoming a better fat burner improves our metabolic flexibility. And this should mean that we're really insulin sensitive and we are preventing chronic disease, or maybe arming ourselves against the chronic disease. And so I picked up on this. I listened to these podcasts and I was like, oh, well, I care about my metabolic health. I care about my mitochondria. So should I be doing zone 2? Because all I do is high intensity. I'm like a balls to the wall type of exerciser, is short and sweet. And so then I was considering for myself if I needed zone 2, and I started doing some long distance running, etc. Gave up on it very quickly. And then that was way back. That's like almost a decade ago. And so once I started my PhD, zone 2 is still being talked and pushed online for metabolic health reasons to the general public. So this was
Yes. I think that's a key distinction because that was one of my questions coming up.
Yeah. So it was being pushed for just like metabolic health. Like we all need to be doing zone 2 because we need to improve our mitochondrial function because our mitochondria is so important to metabolic health. And yes, I agree with that, but whether or not zone 2 is what's improving that is what we can get to in this podcast. But essentially, I brought the idea of zone 2 to my supervisor because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to research. I wanted to research something topical. And so I was like, oh, well, what if we do some sort of like zone 2 training study? Our lab studies mitochondria, so it's a perfect fit. And that's when my supervisor, Dr. Brendan Gerd, I'm going to have to quote him in my dissertation for saying the most common phrase from him during my first couple of years in his lab was, "Is that true?" Because I would bring these things that I would hear on social media and he'd be like, "Is that true?" And then I'd be like, "Oh, well, I don't know. I heard it from a really smart person." Like I was just appealing to authority at that time. So zone 2 is one of those topics of that doesn't make sense. That doesn't line up with what we know about physiology and mitochondrial adaptations and how we adapt to stress, the stress of exercise, because zone 2 isn't very stressful as far as metabolic stress goes.
Yep.
And so that's what kind of got me also just losing trust in what I hear online, ironically, because this is
You mean
a podcast.
some of the gurus online may not be correct? Oh my God.
Yeah, no, it's, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about science communication and social media because it's I feel like it's a losing battle. Podcasts at least allows us to discuss the nuances. So anyways, my motivation was really just like, oh, him questioning me and me being like, wait, what? I don't know what I know now. I don't know what I believe. And so he was like, why don't we find all the evidence we can that looks at any sort of zone 2 training study, pull out all the mitochondrial outcomes from all of these studies and see what the evidence shows. It was a pretty basic, like, like this is obvious that something that's so commonly repeated online, like how hasn't anyone done this? So I don't think we did anything special. We didn't do a study. We just basically looked for the evidence, which I feel like as someone who's sharing science online, so the people that were promoting zone 2, I think it's responsible to have evidence to back up what you're saying on social media, especially with people with huge platforms where what they say is actually changing the behaviors of the people that are consuming that content. Anyways, that's an aside. So basically, for about 6 months, a master's student in our lab, Andreas Martin McDonald, and I scoured the literature for anything that could even slightly equate to zone 2. So we used the definition of zone 2 as a blood lactate level of 2 millimolars because that's how it's typically prescribed to the general public from the popular voices
staying
online.
under that sort of cap, right?
Yes. And so why, I guess, just a quick little theory of why zone 2. So blood lactate increases as exercise intensity increases, but it does so in a way that we hit like a little tick, a little above our baselines. We always have a little bit of blood lactate in our blood. But as if we were to do an incremental exercise test, as we increase exercise intensity, blood lactate will have a small bump above resting, and that's typically around 2 millimolar, and that's considered our first lactate threshold. As we increase exercise intensity above our lactate threshold, it'll start to increase a bit more exponentially until we hit this second lactate threshold. And anything between our first and second lactate threshold, if we were to do continuous exercise at a fixed exercise intensity, we should reach a pretty steady state. But there's above our second lactate threshold, if we increase duration at a fixed exercise intensity, our blood lactate will increase exponentially. And these two thresholds, they also demarcate our exercise intensity domains. So in exercise physiology, we don't talk about zones. We talk about intensity domains. And because that's what there's actual physiological markers that we can use that demarcate those domains. And there's different physiological responses in the moderate, which is the lowest, the heavy, which is in the middle, and the severe intensity domain, which is where we would reach our VO2 max. And so zone 2 falls right below our first lactate threshold, and that means our blood lactate's really low. So again, under 2 millimole. The way it's discussed online or prescribed is around 1.7 millimolars. So, but no one's doing blood lactate testing. But
almost nobody.
So we try to equate it to different things like percentage of heart rate max, doing a talk test. So if you're able to sit in steady state exercise and still maintain a conversation, you should be breathing a bit heavier than you would just at rest, but you should be able to maintain a comfortable conversation. That's typically associated with our lactate threshold or our zone 2. There's RPE as well. So there's various different, I guess, markers that try to anchor that 2 millimolar to something else, but it's not none of these things are going to accurately get you into zone 2 if that's what you're relying on. Blood lactate is essentially, or if you're, I guess, attached to a metabolic cart and able to look at your VO2 kinetics. But otherwise, blood lactate is the most accurate way to find these thresholds. So we looked for any study that fell in what we defined as zone 2, so anything 2 millimolar or lower, and pulled out any outcome that was related to mitochondrial adaptations or our fat oxidative capacity, because these are typically the things that people promote zone 2 for. And I'll just take a break and let you jump in if you have any questions.
No, that's good. I think it's interesting, and I don't know if I'm guilty of this too, but it's the physiologic differences versus the zone, like zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I found over time, I tend to speak more in zones now because it's just easier to try to convey an intensity versus exactly what you said is 100% correct. But most people have no idea what lactate is. They have no idea okay, so now you're talking, well, what is lactate? I don't know how this defines intensity. So you have to go through and explain how lactate is made, what it's doing. And it's easier just to say, some zone 3 or just make it really hard.
Right.
But most people, unfortunately, then are probably not zoned correctly. Where did they get that from? How did they get it? And most people then are even using 220 minus your age to find their max heart rate, which is, I think the standard deviation on that, like what, plus or minus 17 or 19 or something astronomical, was never really designed for that per se. So I think it gets complicated really fast to try to define even just the intensity that we're talking about. And my question related to that is, I've gravitated for zone 2 of using the talk test, where if you're talking to someone on the phone, you should be able to tell you're exercising, but you should be able to get out like complete sentences and have multiple sentences back to back. Would you agree that is without any technology at all, do you think that is a useful way to define where the limit of a high end of zone 2 would be?
Yeah, I think there was a study that we cited, and
there is a couple studies on it, actually.
That it was a kind of a reliable way I think it was just recreationally training or recreational active and individuals. I will say, though, that I've done now probably nearly 200 lactate thresholds in the lab. And the very unfit individuals reach 4 millimolar or 5 plus, and they're still like not even like heavy breathing.
Yeah. They look at a bike and their lactate spikes to like 4.5.
Yeah. So because they reach their lactate, they're basically at their lactate threshold at
Yep.
rest, just walking. So I don't know how. I think it depends. It depends is my answer of whether that's accurate or not, because it could be accurate for someone who's fit, but maybe the less fit you are, the less accurate it gets. So yeah, I don't know how accurate the talk test is or what population you'd be speaking to.
Yeah. My thought is if it's for a recreational lifter or aerobic person who's like an intermediate, they exercise 2 to 5 times per week. They're not really that metabolically destroyed, but their cardiac system may not be the most developed either. That's what my bias is. I think the talk test is pretty good for that. I haven't found anything else that's better. 100% agree it's not the best. And as you become into populations that are more metabolically inflexible or very high stress, crap, some of those people, I've done lactates on them and they're sitting at 3 millimoles, just sitting in a chair looking at me. I'm like, woo, like you got some issues there, Bob.
Right. No, 100%. But I guess I'll also get to, like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And why would you say it doesn't matter?
From my perspective, I think after writing this review that general public, I'm jumping to conclusions, but
Yeah.
we want to be working out above zone 2 all the time. So knowing your zone 2 is irrelevant because you should just be pushing as hard as you can for what you're able to recover from. And if that's 40 minutes in zone 3 or 10 minutes in zone 5, doing intervals or something, then I think that the talk test becomes, or finding your zone 2 becomes irrelevant because I believe that all the evidence supports the use of zone 3 plus volume as promoting all the adaptations that we want for promoting better health.
Yeah. So your argument is it's a mute point because if you're a general population, you're just doing a ton of zone 2, you're probably not going to see a huge benefit from it anyway. So trying to argue about what is the actual delineation of zone 2 is kind of missing the forest for the trees type thing.
Right. I think it's focusing on something that might not matter. Like we do have evidence that low intensity exercise in very metabolically unhealthy individuals does improve health outcomes and VO2 max and everything. But that still doesn't mean that going above that isn't better, which our review pretty much supports the use of yes, we've found some evidence that zone 2 can promote some mitochondrial signaling or activate some mitochondrial signaling pathways, but going above zone 2 almost always, if not, produces the same but better outcomes than anything at our lactate threshold. So promoting zone 2 over higher intensities to the general public when most people just don't even exercise enough, it's discouraging people from doing higher intensities when they could be getting more bang for their buck or more metabolic health and exercise adaptations from. And I think that's where like this, I don't know, it does, I get like emotional about it because I'm like, it's preventing people from getting better health outcomes. And I want people to be healthy. So I want to make sure that things that are being shared online are evidence-based because people follow it. So I think that this has become important to me to share just because I know that the zone 2 messaging is changing how people are exercising.
And I think the key points there are that, and we'll talk about other populations coming up, but this would be for general population. And of course, it all comes down to compared to what. So you had a group doing 3 hours of zone 2 who are just not very metabolically healthy. Of course, they're going to see some benefit from that. the question then is, okay, if you had the 3 hours to dedicate to old school aerobic training, could you pick something better than zone 2 for any portion of that time? And I think the answer is, oh yeah, you could pick almost anything that is going to be superior to that. And I think telling general population that, yes, you need to increase your aerobic health is a good message. Your VO2 max should probably be higher. Agree with all that. But then consequently telling them, oh, you need to do 2 to 3 hours of what they already hate doing. And then they're going to do it for maybe 6, 8 weeks. If they really get motivated, they hire a coach. And then what I've seen is, and I get a fair amount of emails on this, you probably get them too. Oh, I did like 8 weeks of like zone 2 and I didn't really get any better. I redid my VO2 max, however I did it. And I feel like I wasted all this time when I could have done something better. And so now they don't trust the coach or the person they got the information from. They feel like they put in all this effort and they didn't see a result from it. And unfortunately, what I see then is they're just like, ah, screw it. I'm going to go back to doing what I was doing before. This is stupid. Exercise is dumb.
Yeah, personally, I've never gotten these types of emails. And I don't think zone 2 is promoted to increase VO2 max in the first place. It is just, it's like there's divergent adaptations. Like we do 80% of our training in zone 2 for our mitochondria and our fat oxidative capacity. And then we do that 20% at high intensity, zone 5, for improving VO2 max. And that distribution, that 80-20, comes from elite athletes who are exercising 20 to 40 hours a week, where 80% or that 20% that's at high intensity is still above what that would look like in just someone who's exercising maybe 3 to 4 times a week for 30 to 60 minutes each bout. So we're correlating that 20% or that elite athletes have pristine mitochondria, great metabolic health, very high performance. And we're saying that it's the result of that 80% spent in zone 2, when all the evidence would suggest that all of those adaptations come from that 20% spent at high intensities. It's just because that number is so much smaller, it's like this cognitive dissonance where we associate the large number with the results versus considering that many of those adaptations are probably promoted by that smaller volume spent at high intensities. And then when that gets portrayed to the general public, like, oh, we should be doing 80-20. Well, someone who's working out 4 hours a week, 80-20, they're doing no high intensity and they're doing tons of low intensity when they're missing out on the benefits of high intensity then. And so the 80-20 distribution, trying to place that in the general public and to non-athletes. And like, I'm a recreational exerciser. Like, I don't put myself in that. I exercise most days of the week, but I wouldn't ever consider myself an athlete. So I wouldn't, placing that 80-20 rule in someone like me who exercises 30 minutes a day, that is completely misplaced, because that large training volume is why they do 80-20. So the percentage distribution makes no sense when the training volume is so much smaller.
Yeah. And I've often said that couch potato physiology to elite athlete physiology are just, they might as well be in a different universe. Like, a lot of the same principles still apply. They still work the same way, but the outcomes and the recommendations you get don't transfer between the two. And I feel like there was I think it was Sandro Milan who did a lot of that original work. And that was an elite level cyclist. And if you ever looked at the power output of an elite level cyclist in zone 5, it's absolutely bonkers. Like, they're legit working for zone 2 is probably higher than someone who's not really trained in zone 5. Like,
100%.
they're not even, they don't even overlap in almost any part of the spectrum. So trying to transfer something from elite cyclists down to general population, I think, is not the best idea. And then I've also wondered, even with those studies in elite level cyclists, if you've ever worked with any elite level cyclists, they're all crazy nutbags. Like, if you tell them to do zone 2, they'll probably follow your prescription. But if you tell them, like, hey, just go do an easy ride or just don't ride today, it's zone 3, zone 4. Oh, I did a bunch of hill climbing. Like, it's definitely not easy work per se. So I've often wondered how much of the benefit, even in that population, is it zone 2, or was it the fact that you're just not dropping the hammer like every single day and accumulating this massive amount of fatigue also?
Yeah, and that's a really good point because there might be some benefit of zone 2 for elite athletes
Sure.
that we just don't know yet because the studies have not been done. Because their power output in zone 2 is so much higher than what even a recreational athlete zone 2 would be. And just that amount of power output, like the amount of muscle recruitment, the amount of blood flow, the amount of work your body has to do to be able to meet that energy demand, even in zone 2, even though blood lactate is low, there might be some adaptations in someone whose zone 2 is just so high because of just the absolute power output. Even if the relative output's the same, that
Yeah.
absolute value might be pushing adaptations in elite athletes. But that's also just a theory. Like that's not been tested yet. But the point being that elite athletes might be benefiting from zone 2, but those benefits are probably not going to be seen in someone with a lactate threshold of 80 watts. So
Do you know how we got here? Like how, and I've been trying to trace this back and I don't have a good answer of how do we get to the messaging that people should start with zone 2? Because you've obviously looked at all the literature on this too, and Canadian guys like Martin Gabalia and a bunch of other people have been doing high intensity interval training and stuff on general population, not even just elite level athletes, for freaking decades. It's not like the data wasn't there and we're like, oh wow, we have all this brand new data and so we're going to change our mind on it. To me, at least when I look at it, and I know you've done a better research review of this than I have, most of the data was there. We just seem to ignore it. I don't know.
yeah, well, I think we're just extrapolating from these observational correlative studies in elite athletes and being like, okay,
Yeah.
well, they do it, so it must work, instead of finding actual experimental prospective studies that put study an intervention of zone 2. We're basically just extrapolating from these observations in athletes and assuming that because they do it, it works. So don't even question it. But where it, like the history of all of this and like where 80/20 came from is something that I'm really interested in digging more into. And it looks like it started in like the 1950s. Name of Arthur Lydiard. I'm just started reading about this now because I want to know the history of like, where did this come from? Where did the pyramid come from? Why do we have this perception of a base pyramid? And that base is built with zone 2. And then everything above is where we basically earn the right to do higher intensities as we work our way up the pyramid. But first you need to build that base, that aerobic base. And the idea of that also just doesn't follow what we know about physiology, because you can do high intensity work and build your aerobic base. Our aerobic adaptations are built through metabolic stress, through shear stress, through like doing hard efforts. That's how we elicit those adaptations that make exercise easier the next time we do it, because we became fitter. We adapt so that we're more well prepared for that bout next time. So we have to stress the system, and working below lactate threshold is the power output, the intensity that is supposed to elicit the least amount of stress above what we would just resting and sitting. Because we don't accumulate much blood lactate. We don't break down much glycogen. We don't activate our sympathetic nervous system. We don't, like, everything is we can exercise with accumulating very little stress. And that's maybe why athletes do it, because it's definitely why athletes do it, because they want to increase their training volume without accumulating stress for which they would have to recover from. And when we do hard bouts, we do have to allow ourselves time to recover. So whether zone 2 is maybe improving recovery, but it's positioned as it's actually causing adaptations, whereas
Right.
it might just be supporting recovery, or just psychologically allowing athletes to exercise without incurring any stress. But whether it's promoting mitochondrial and aerobic adaptations, that's where there's not strong evidence to support that. But yeah, so when it comes to the base though, like yeah, this idea, like the way endurance training coaches conceptualize is like, we do a lot of this base training. Like we work at low intensities. That's our large volume. We build that base of the pyramid. And then that allows us to basically tolerate the high intensities. Whereas I think that the pyramid should be flipped and that you start with high intensity to build the aerobic base. And once you work your way up to the base, and that you max out how much high intensity you can do that you can recover from. So like your recoverable volume, and that'll probably change from person to person based on your lifestyle, like your nutrition, how well you sleep, etc., your age. But however much zone 3 plus volume that you can tolerate and recover well from, once you max that out, you essentially deserve the right to do zone 2. But the way it's promoted right now is that zone 2 be prioritized before you do high intensity. So I think we have it backwards, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree. Like if from a programming standpoint, all things being equal, if I'm not worried about how much higher intensity work or lifting or technique or anything else, like there's a bunch of other factors that go into it. But if you came to me and said, okay, this person is recreationally active, your goal is to get the highest aerobic adaptations from them possible. We'll do that by measuring VO2 max. Yeah, the first thing I would program would be some intervals at VO2 max. Now, again, in some of my programs, I may not have people start with that because I may be worried about their technique or interfering with their recoverability with some of their lifting or prioritizing other things. But if they said, okay, you don't have any other priorities and we can guarantee their technique is going to be solid, they're not going to have any mechanical issues doing it, you don't have any other stressors to worry about, then yeah, I'm definitely going to go 100% of VO2 max for probably 2 to 6 minute intervals, and then just try to see how far I can push that over several weeks.
Yeah. And like, it doesn't even have to be like, so a lot of the literature, like, especially when it comes to mitochondrial, well, particularly when it comes to mitochondrial adaptations, which was the focus of this review, suggests that volume is a key factor that is associated with positively with mitochondrial content. And people take that to think that, okay, well, we have to accumulate these large volumes, and we can accumulate large volumes by doing zone 2. But missing from this conversation is that the studies that are used within this correlation are often above zone 2. So even these moderate intensity continuous training studies are often prescribed at like 65% of VO2 max, which for a recreational individual is almost certainly above zone 2. So their lactate is likely above 2 millimolars. In a trained person, it could very well, 65% could very well be below their lactate threshold, but for most just recreational people. So when it comes to general public, the associations between volume and mitochondrial content is not evidence to support the use of zone 2. And I think that's what gets lost in the conversation as well, is that all continuous exercise is zone 2. It's like, we're either zone 2 or we're doing, oh no, I just got a recording in progress.
Oh, I did.
That would be really ironic if you were like, oh, I always record from the beginning so that I don't forget. And then it.
Oh, wasn't it recording the whole time?
I thought so, because when I jumped on the call, it said recording in progress.
Okay, well, we'll just keep going and hopefully it's okay. Because I always set them to auto record each time I go in. So, because you got a little notice that it was recording as you went in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we should be okay. So, all right, we'll keep going and cross our fingers.
Okay. I'll start from my point of that. What gets lost in the conversation is that moderate intensity continuous training is often thought, like zone 2 is often just thought of just continuous training. So the arguments get, it's zone 2 or high intensity intervals, but not all continuous exercise is zone 2. You can do long durations, an hour in zone 3. And I think you would get better adaptations doing that than you would be zone 2. It's just that people often associate all continuous exercise with zone 2. And then when we look at studies like big meta-analyses that show that moderate intensity gives you the same adaptations, whether it's VO2 max or mitochondrial content, as high intensity intervals. So if we're saying MICT is the exact same as HIIT, over the long-term training studies, people use that as evidence that, oh, look at zone 2 is you can do large volumes of this low intensity stuff without the pain of doing high intensity intervals, and you're going to end up in the same result. So you just do a lot of zone 2, but the problem is that those mixed studies are above zone 2. And so we're mixing up the idea of continuous exercise, steady state exercise as that zone 2, when all like the evidence for mixed is likely like zone 3 plus.
Yeah, and MIT, you're saying moderate intensity training, right?
Yes, sorry, moderate
No,
intensity
that's right.
continuous training.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And again, it all goes back to what population are you talking about? How trained are you? Most people, yeah, maybe a true zone 3 they could do for quite a while, but if you're not as well trained, probably not as long. And again, the benefit you have of being less, let's say, aerobically trained is you don't need as big of a stimulus to see a positive effect. It's just like weight training. If you've never weight trained before, you could probably curl friggin' soup cans and get stronger for a few weeks. Like, you don't need a huge intensity because anything you're doing is going to be beneficial. But there is these kind of threshold effects where if you want to see more of a benefit, or you want to try to see the maximal adaptation for what you're doing, then yeah, you have to do something that's intense. But by definition, if you're not as well trained, that absolute numbers, like we talked about, are going to be quite a bit lower compared to people who are trained.
Yeah, and I think of like mitochondrial and aerobic adaptations. Resistance training, it's like progressive overload. Like you
Yeah.
always want to be stressing the systems that we adapt and get better. Whereas zone 2 kind of contradicts that theory.
Yeah. And back to the base and where zone 2 base comes from. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but my bias, and I'd have to go back and look at all the literature again, but I think it came from kind of Ken Cooper's work like many decades ago. And I think it was based on running. And I think where it came from is the fact that if you took a lot of people who are not very good at running and you have them do higher intensity work running, you just blow up a whole bunch of people mechanically, not necessarily aerobically. And I think because of the extrapolation of a lot of the early exercise phys work was on a treadmill. Yes, there's been a lot of bike work that's been done very early on, but it looks like the bias was definitely more. Look at all the old school metabolic cart studies, VO2 max, like most of them were treadmill based studies. So I've often wondered if that recommendation was based on running and was more from a mechanical limitation of just need your system to get used to this impact loading of 6 to 10 times body weight. And we have to start at a lower intensity because of that, not necessarily because of the aerobic stuff. Where I think if you did it on a rower or a bike or something like that, where you don't have that impact, I think you could do things differently. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I agree with that. Like, if that is the case for doing larger volumes at low intensity, sure. Like, there might be benefit, particularly maybe with running, that doing like long, slow runs is benefiting the system. But I still think that the messaging is like, oh, you have to do large volumes for your mitochondria and your fat oxidative capacity, which that is not supported by evidence. And so it's not to say like, oh, don't do zone 2. Maybe there is some sort of benefit from it. But I think we just are giving it a rationale that isn't evidence-based and just like perpetuating that message. And so sure, like there might be some sort of biomechanical benefit, especially like you said with running. But that's not something that I've addressed personally, and that's not what our review addresses. So I do think that people could make a lot of good reasons why we should maybe be doing low intensity zone 2 training. But the messaging does seem to be promoting the use of it for mitochondrial and fat oxidative and metabolic flexibility specifically, and for health reasons. So I don't disagree with you. That could be a very logical rationale for promoting those like biomechanical adaptations that support your ability to even sprint.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, I think there was because of that, if that theory is correct, that we over extrapolated that and said, oh, well, look at all this old stuff on this aerobic base building and this group of runners did it. So therefore, this is what we need to do for maximal mitochondrial and aerobic adaptations. And again, you did see some of that in some of those early studies too. But yeah, it just seems like a lot of stuff just never gets questioned as to why and looked at from a different perspective. It's just carried forward. And the other part, which is my pet peeve, is nobody actually reads any research. Like nobody, but very few people read the actual research of what that was done. And for years, I had this old study by Hickson who just beat the ever living crap out of these people and saw absolutely massive aerobic adaptations. Like I think the average in the group went up by 17 milliliters per kg per minute over, it was like a 10 or 12 week study. Just insane. And I purposely did not talk about it in public for like 2 years because I was super curious if anyone would find it with all these people talking about VO2 max and aerobic training and all this stuff they're doing. Nobody did. And it was an old study. And I don't think you can replicate it now and you'd have so much dropout and everything else. But just because it's an older study doesn't mean that it's bad. And some of the early work was very interesting. So it just seems like a lot of it is just parroting, oh, this sounds good. And if it has a logical sounding explanation or a good mechanism to it, like if you can put 3 mechanisms to something, oh my God, everyone will believe you now. But again, like you said, is this true? Like we have to go and look at what did the actual outcome studies say? And again, in what population was it done to have a better idea of what could be a better application?
Yeah, I'm going to parrot your parroting sentence because I think that is why Zone 2 got so popular, is just like the parroting of something someone heard from an authority figure and then just got repeated so many times until it became truth. And that's why, like, I hope that our paper allows people to question and think and be an example of questioning something that is so strongly held. It's funny, the like psychology to witness like the reactions to this paper, and that a lot of people will praise us, our group, for writing this paper and then still end with, oh, but we still have to be doing Zone 2. It's like this.
But more research is needed.
Yeah. And like more research.
But you can say that about
like,
everything.
Yeah. Like there hasn't been the Zone 2 studies that we would want that warrant these types of claims. So those studies haven't been done. But like, it's just really interesting to see the like reaction to this paper of people who are Zone 2 proponents who are like being like, oh, I'm so happy you wrote this paper. It's so great, blah, 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 blah. But like athletes are doing it. So like it must be doing something that we just don't know about yet. And it's, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what my point is, other than it's really interesting to witness.
Yeah. And I'm guilty of this too. You can find some older stuff from me where I'm like, yeah, I do Zone 2 and then do some high intensity stuff. But as I started doing it, and then especially when I went back and started reading more of the literature, I was like, oh man. So I did Zone 2 with this person and we did some base building, but the VO2 max didn't go up. So maybe we needed a bigger foundation in order to do it. But then I'm like, well, maybe we can just add more of the higher intensity stuff in first, so we don't have to burn 8 weeks to try to get their base up. And then when you start testing stuff, like I'm a weirdo who has full Moxie set up, a freaking metabolic cart in their garage in their home, like you realize, oh, I probably don't need to do all of this low volume work. Again, I think there is some benefit to it from a movement and a recovery standpoint. You know, if you look at a lot of even the old Russian literature, it basically would say anything to move blood flow around is probably going to help your recovery. So I think you could make an argument for that as a recovery modality. Sure. Yeah, I think that's cool. Like I would probably agree with that. But to say that this is the foundational thing you need to do, I've changed my mind now. We're now, if you said, okay, you have a general population, what would you recommend them to do? I'd be like, yeah, do some VO2 max intervals at least once a week. And then probably do a lot of Zone 3 stuff. If you can get away doing Zone 4, great. my question then is, have you noticed that some people just seem to handle higher intensity better than others? Like I can think of like a couple of people I've coached with in the past where their sleep was pretty good, their HRV scores are good, like their lifestyle's pretty good. The people were at probably relative similar VO2 max. And some people, like I could just absolutely obliterate them with like literally like true high intensity stuff, and they somehow would recover. I would say those people are definitely not the norm by any means. Where the other athlete who looks almost the same on paper, man, like one session a week was about all they could tolerate. And I would say that's more the norm. Have you seen something that's similar to that, or do you have any thoughts as to what might be going on? Because I'm at a complete loss.
I do know that there's overtraining studies where they tried to overtrain the
True.
participants and they couldn't. Like they retested them halfway through and their performance just kept getting better and better when they were trying to get them into like overtraining.
And I think those studies, correct me if I'm wrong, were interval training only, and they were not necessarily weight training or doing anything else, correct?
Yeah, they were cycling interval training
Yeah.
studies and they were doing like 2-a-days. And
Oh yeah, they were brutalizing them for, was it 6 or 8 weeks? I can't remember the duration.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they couldn't, like they were trying to induce overtraining and they couldn't. So I don't know. I just think that I think we can handle a bit more zone 3 plus volume than we think we can. We've run some pretty intense training studies in our lab. So this is just simply my observation. It's not even my study. It's just me just like coming into the lab and seeing the participants. And there's definitely people who come in. It was 3 days a week and it was 5 times 4-minute intervals at 85% peak power output. And so they were really hard intervals. Like 4-minute intervals are actually
That was
so
horrible.
hard. So 3 times a week in cyclists, these were trained cyclists. And there were people who could handle it and would come in with a smile on their face. And there are people who absolutely hated it and probably regretted signing up for the study. So I do think that there's just an individual response because relatively they're all working out at the same intensity, doing the same protocol. So I don't know. I would lean on the studies where they tried to overtrain doing 2-a-days for, I think it was up to 4 weeks. And yeah, they didn't induce any overtraining. So not to say you can't overtrain, like it's for sure, if you're doing intervals every single day for week on week, months on months, like you're gonna know though when you're tired, like, and you're gonna get to that day and you're gonna go, you know what? I don't think I can handle another interval session. I'm gonna do 30 minutes in zone 3. Like you're allowed to listen to your body and know when to change things up. But I just don't know if that's like, I just still don't think like, oh, we need to structure in zone 2 training into our routines. But that's just my opinion. Like, I don't coach people. I'm coming from literally like the scientific literature is what it says based on experimental evidence. I'm not necessarily coming from the perspective of working with individuals. And I will admit that my perspective is going to be different from someone who works with real people. Sure. And that is okay. And maybe zone 2 has a place when it comes to the psychology, the recovery, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm addressing again, and I keep reiterating just because I want to make sure that like I'm not cornering myself into anywhere, is that we literally just looked at, is zone 2 like inherently better than higher intensities for promoting mitochondrial adaptations and fat oxidative capacity? And that is where I put my like the line in the sand. Anything else is me just exploratory within the literature and theorizing.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, again, I point back to the Hickson study where I'm blanking on what it is now, but I had it in the flexible meathead cardio course. I want to say it was 6 days a week. I think on the 2 run days, they're told just go run as fast as you can for like 40 minutes. I think the 3 or 4 other ones were just some freaking hideous interval training. I want to say it was 12 weeks. I think they measured them at least once or twice during the study. And the running joke, which probably is the rumor, is that back in that lab, there was a kind of a comparison that most of the people doing the study were working in the lab or friends of people in the lab. And the running joke was that no one wanted to be the pussy who dropped out of the study. So what I heard, this is all just conjecture, is that there was a lot of competition with one another to make sure that they didn't want to be known as a person who didn't finish the study. But the rumor was that all of them hated it. It was the worst training they ever did in their life. They probably never did that again, but from a result standpoint, was highly effective. Again, they were not weight training. They were not doing anything else per se. So I do think that there is something where how you feel and your results don't always match up, which isn't to say don't listen to your body or anything like that. The one thing I use in the real world is I would say, look at your output. And if your output is demonstratively much lower and your RP is still high, okay, then maybe you don't do many intervals that day. But it's also shocking how often, and this happens with weight training, I'm sure it's happened to you, where you're like, oh man, I don't want to go to the gym today. I just feel tired. I feel off. Yeah, my metrics are so-so. When you get there, you do your warm-up, you get into your first working set. By the time you get into what you're actually doing, you're like, oh, I feel okay, and the session was pretty good. Maybe not the best session ever, but probably not the worst session ever. So I always tell clients that don't equate how you feel per se until you get to the point of doing the thing and you're warmed up and into it. And then look at your output. If your output is demonstratively like way off, then yeah, it might not be there unless we're purposely trying to overreach you for a period of time, then just leave. But it is interesting how more often than not, and again, there's a limit to this, you can usually do more than what you think predicting going into the session.
Yeah, fair. And I think like that would be shown within the literature because there's tons of HIIT studies where they do it. My HIIT study was 5 days. Mind you, it was just 5 days, but it was Monday to Friday. It was every single day. They came in consecutively and they could do their intervals at 100% work rate max. So yeah, like it's doable. And that's why I say like, I think when it comes to trying to figure out like, oh, what do I do? It's figuring out your like maximal volume, zone 3 plus, that's your maximal recoverable volume. Sorry. So whatever that looks like for an individual, it's whatever you can do, hard efforts that you can recover from. It's when you start getting into those like, oh, I'm now sick and now I have disturbed sleep and now my HRV is tanking or et cetera, any marker of overtraining. That's when you could consider like pulling back or adding in something like zone 2.
Gotcha. What are your thoughts about frequency? So one thing, this is again my bias based on the literature and just practice of doing this stuff with people for like 2 decades, is I would make a harder argument for more frequency with aerobic training than I would with anaerobic or lifting. What I've seen is, if schedule not beside it, if I can get someone to do some type of aerobic training 6 out of 7 days of the week, it seems like they get better progress. And again, if you look at some of the mechanistic studies, and again, it's probably an over extrapolation of how long certain things stay turned on and turned off. It's a few hours. It's not like weight training where you could have muscle protein synthesis still running 48, potentially 72 hours later. So my argument is that you do the thing to get the stimulus, you see the outcome, that sort of returns back to baseline. Again, not all the time. There's some high intensity stuff that stays a little longer. And then you basically give the stimulus again because now you're back at baseline. Now you can elevate it again, and you just do that with more of a frequency-based approach.
Yeah. So wait, what are you specifically asking? Like, what's the ideal frequency?
Well, I'm just thinking, would you agree that if all things being equal, would you push frequency of aerobic training as one of the modalities that you would play with, like going higher frequency versus lower frequency?
I don't know what the like minimum return is. Like, what if you do it once a week? Do you like, what's the difference between that versus twice a week versus 3 times a week? I have no idea, but I would say
I can't
probably
find
wouldn't go longer than you probably
I can't
wouldn't
find a
go
dose response study.
Yeah, I'm not sure dose response, but I would think that you wouldn't want to wait like a week between, like only doing once a week sounds like not enough.
Yeah.
Anything over a week, that's probably where it, like the minimum dose is. Because if you're only doing like a HIIT session twice a month, like every other week, it doesn't sound like it's going to promote much adaptation. So yeah, I actually have no idea of frequency.
Yeah, because I've done what I call a 6-minute progressive. So they'll start like on a rower or assault bike and not necessarily do any warm up. And then the goal is after 6 minutes, should be at a relatively high RPE of 8 or 9, but only for the last third. And I've done this quite a bit with a fair amount of people. These, again, are recreational lifters. These are not necessarily aerobic athletes, but they're not necessarily untrained either. And it just seems like 6 days a week of doing that, and you get a fair amount of zone 3 work. You get some zone 4, maybe not quite touch zone 5 near the end. But it's also only 6 minutes, so it's not a huge duration of time. And most people just doing that in the morning, separate from their lifting, or you can do it before lifting, in addition to doing some intervals that week. I don't know. That's kind of what I've found as just the sweet spot of it seems to be most people can get a fair amount of aerobic adaptation from that without having to do a high amount of work. But again, that's all completely anecdotal. And the only reason I found that is I just played with everything for like 2 years. Just because if you go too hard for too long, I found that it definitely limited their lifting sessions later in the day, which I didn't want to do. And then if you went all the way down, and I've done zone 2 stuff for 2, 3, 4 hours a week in some people, it just seemed like that was not enough intensity to see marketable change. And then they would still do some aerobic stuff, maybe Tuesday, Thursday on that too. But it just seemed like that frequency of exposure to get just that enough intensity was beneficial. But again, I can't find any literature that backs that up directly. I can find a lot of stuff that's indirectly supporting that, but just curious on your opinion of that.
There's sprint interval training studies
Yes.
that are the tiny, it's like down to 10-second intervals that are activating
Yeah.
like our adaptation pathway. So
But I think those kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but from an outcome standpoint, I think those kind of maxed out within a couple of weeks though, didn't they, or not?
I have no idea, but I would also, just based on that idea, that sprint interval training studies aren't very long in duration. So who knows
Right.
when you do them for a long time. That's a
Yeah.
problem too. Like all of our HIIT studies are like 4 to 6 weeks. Like there's
That's,
a few
yeah, I
like
was just
12
going to
weeks.
say, like, I can't think of a study that's that high intensity that's even longer than that.
Yeah. So I don't know when like things would like our adaptations would plateau per se. But if you're using, I don't know, sprint interval training like a Tabata or something, that's 4 minutes of your day. And if
Yeah.
that's what's maintaining any sort of adaptation from or inducing any further adaptation from your actual structured interval, like longer interval training, then why not? It's like, yeah, it sucks for, it's not that much work. And it's 4 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll say my little tyrant about the Tabata study, but my short version is most people, what they say they're doing is Tabata is not even close, right? Because it's 170% of your VO2 max is the intensity. So if you can keep that up, then yeah, by all means, like great, do it. But then you invert your rest period for 20 seconds of work and 10 seconds of rest. I usually just find most people are not trained enough to do that. But I think you can take the principle of doing high intensity work as long as you can keep the quality up. And I think you should definitely play with that, especially if you're really rate limited on time.
Yeah. Side story, I met Dr. Tabata.
You did? Oh, cool.
Last
How
year
was
at a
that?
conference. He's a very short, cute old man.
Did you get to ask him about the study?
He did a presentation. I was at a conference in Montreal.
Oh, cool.
No, I didn't ask him any questions. But it's
What was he presenting
we're
on?
all
Was it
pronouncing
that
it wrong.
study?
It's Tabata.
Oh, is it? Oh, shit. Okay.
But I still like Tabata. It sounds better. He was just sharing all of like his history of his research and everything. Showing some photos and yeah.
Oh, that's cool. I would make an argument that in terms of aerobic, anaerobic training in the fitness world, if I were to rank all the studies in terms of popularity, I still think that is the most popular study that's ever been done.
I don't even know what like exact study because because he only did like 2 studies or something, right?
Yeah, I think he only did one main study, which I might have the date wrong, but I want to say it was 1996, I think.
Yeah, and then
Could be
that
wrong on
just
that.
took off with the one study.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's like the zone 2
Good for
thing.
him. We should
Yeah,
take
which is great.
marketing advice from Dr. Tabata.
Yeah, which again is great, but it's just like on the high intensity side, I feel like that's the study that just gets parroted as, oh, Tabata one arm preacher curls. It's like, did you even read the study? Like, what are you doing? Like, it just seems like that's the name we're going to stick on everything now. Just like, oh, zone 2, but just do this interval. Oh, you don't want to be on a bike. That's okay. Just do all this other body weight stuff and whatever, and we'll call it zone 2. It just seems like these labels just get tossed on everything at some point.
Yeah, totally. Tabata is just basically a timer at this point.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about walking? I've heard people say walking is cardio, to walking should be your zone 2, to doesn't even matter, to again, it seems crazy to me.
I think walking is great. I
Yeah.
think your step count is really important in a day. Your non-physical activity or non-exercise physical activity matters. Whether or not it's inducing adaptation, I don't think so, but I think it's just elevating your energy expenditure and, like you said, getting blood flowing. Like, that's got to be good for you. Reducing sedentary time, we obviously know, is super important, but thinking that's necessary for some sort of adaptation, I would not say so. Unless you're severely unfit, then it could be walking might be your zone 3. We had a study done at Queen where 75% of VO2 max was brisk walking because these people were just overweight, sedentary, metabolically impaired individuals. And they compared low intensity to high intensity, and the high intensity was brisk walking. So that just goes to show that, like, the population that we're considering is so important when it comes to, like, the actual exercise intervention. And that study also is really important for just showing that high intensity, for volume matched high intensity, promoted greater health outcomes and adaptations than the lower intensity training group. And that would suggest, like, all this messaging of zone 2 for people with insulin resistant being like, oh, we have to get these insulin resistant people doing zone 2 to help get their mitochondria and their fat oxidative capacity, get that in place. Like, when we look at actual intervention, exercise intervention studies, high intensity will be better for promoting those insulin sensitive or like improving insulin sensitivity, improving glucose control, improving VO2 max, etc. That's what we're after when we're talking about health and exercising for health. So yeah, I don't think sacrificing time spent at high intensity in place for low intensity is not the right way to go about it.
Yeah. And I think in those studies, like high intensity intervals or even weight training for glucose sensitizing effects, the effects stay around much, much longer than like just zone 2 stuff, right? You think of how far you push the system away from homeostasis and how long it's going to take to get back down. Like I even tell people, just play with this yourself. Like do like an hour of zone 2 and then see how fast, again, this is recreationally active person, how fast your heart rate gets back down to almost resting. In my experience, it's really fast. Again, so that doesn't mean there's no effect, but that just means that you haven't really pushed the system that far away from its baseline. And you can get too far carried away with that and do, too much intensity. But it seems a little weird that we would expect tons of these massive benefits to come from, hey, we just pushed it up baseline a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's when you say it like that, like, it does seem intuitive to think that, okay, intensity is what's driving these adaptations and these outcomes that we're seeking. But this doesn't, again, I'm going to come back to it. Like, it doesn't mean you have to do all these crazy intervals and kill yourself. It's literally just push yourself as hard as you can. And that might be zone 3 for that day. What your hard as you can might be based on many different things and how you subjectively feel that day or objectively feel that day. And I just think that the messaging should not be to deliberately structure in zone 2 if we're trying to improve our mitochondrial capacity, if we're trying to improve our fat oxidative capacity, and if we're trying to improve our health.
Yeah. One of the things I have in the shameless plug for the Meta cardio course is that for lifters, I've had them do on the rower, like either 500 meter or a 1K before their lifting session, maybe not before your leg day, and have it be at an RP of a 7 or an 8, meaning that should be back to baseline within 3 to 5 minutes, and it should not drastically affect your lifting session after that. So, but you're still getting a fair amount of intensity with that too. And again, this is purely anecdotal, but we've seen pretty good benefits from that too, because now you're back to, again, the frequency thing where my bias is I think if you can do some intensity work or do something above zone 2 and do that more often, like if you look at the total accumulation of high quality work over the week, it's going to be a little bit higher than trying to cram that all into one day.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
So as we wrap up here, one of my last questions is, does these changes in mitochondrial, pick your mitochondrial favorite metric, do they translate to actual performance changes? Because my assumption on this would be, of course they do, but then some of the literature looks like all things in physiology, it doesn't appear to be like a direct transfer. And you'll even hear other researchers say that mitochondria are over-designed, meaning that we probably never get close to really maxing out our mitochondria. I think we even talked about this in our first podcast, that it's going to be a rate limiter of performance. But we all know that if you don't have many mitochondria and they suck, like it's going to limit your performance. So what are your kind of thoughts on that?
I've never addressed this question specifically, but yes, you're right that like we have
it just seems really
capacity
messy to
than
me.
what we, yeah, like our mitochondrial capacity, like we probably don't get to that mitochondrial capacity.
Right.
Ever. Okay, wait, but how did you lead into this question? Because I had an answer and then I
That's
forget
all right. To me, it's fuzzy because on one, so if you look at the ends of the spectrum, right, there's something
whether
showing,
it's tied to performance. Yeah.
Right. We see increases in mitochondrial change, but we don't necessarily always see increases in performance. But we know that if you have really very few mitochondria and they just suck, like they don't work well, that is definitely going to limit your performance. But it doesn't appear to be this direct one-to-one transfer. And again, rarely is anything in physiology completely linear where you put this thing in, this always comes back out. So what are your thoughts about all of that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
If mitochondria, how it's associated with performance. I've never looked at that specifically, but mitochondria is obviously, it's a determinant. Mitochondria capacity is a determinant of our aerobic capacity, of our lactate threshold, which is a determinant of performance, both of those.
Sure.
So I would say that either directly or indirectly, our mitochondrial capacity, both respiratory capacity and content, are associated obviously with performance. But whether there's like I improved my mitochondrial I increased mitochondrial biogenesis, now I can run 10 seconds per kilometer faster. I don't know if there's any sort of studies that have correlated those two things, although they probably is, to be honest. But yes, to wrap that up, I don't know, but mitochondria are a determinant of the things that of our physiology that do determine performance. And I wanted to touch on this too, because VO2 max, obviously elite athletes have higher VO2 maxes than like less trained individuals. And VO2 max is a predictor of performance, but not if we were to take a bunch of elite athletes that have the same VO2 max, lactate threshold is actually the bigger predictor of performance. The athletes that have the higher lactate threshold, despite having the same VO2 max, that's more predictive of performance. So that's why I think lactate threshold is really cool, because it's more of like a metric of physiology. It's like it's like a window into the bioenergetics of our skeletal muscle, because the less lactate, or maybe the greater the clearance, the more likely that's going to be associated with performance outcomes. And on that note, I'm going way off of our original questions, but there was a meta-analysis done like a long time ago, like 19 something, that took all the training studies and looked at what training increased lactate threshold. And the more trained you were, the more you needed intensity to increase your lactate threshold, which this also just contradicts the idea of needing zone 2 to essentially build your aerobic base. Because the aerobic base idea is that you have, like, you're pushing your lactate threshold up by working out below it and ballooning your lactate threshold up. Whereas all of the evidence would suggest that you need to work out above your lactate threshold to pull it up. So we all want a higher lactate threshold, but there's a hyper focus on that low intensity to basically like boost our lactate threshold, when I think we need to work out above it to pull it up.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree. And most of the literature would say that lactate threshold is probably the determinant of performance, which gets into the weeds of, oh, but if your VO2 max is 30, by definition, your lactate threshold's not going to be very high compared to someone who has a VO2 max of 65, right? So,
and the training would say the same regardless of if you're trying to increase your VO2 max or
yes,
increase your lactate threshold. So they all physiology works
they're
in
all
concert.
related.
Yeah. When you're at the top, when you've maxed out your VO2 potential, like that's where you get into the weeds of, but none of us are near that. So we don't have to be
No.
concerned about.
No, I equate it to people like, it's thinking about how big is your engine and how much of that performance can you exert over a period of time. Right. So by definition, I want a really big ass engine, and I want to be able to redline the shit out of that car, right? I want to be able to run for extended periods of time at a very high output. And in terms of absolute speed, I can only get there by having a bigger engine. I'm not going to do that with like a 3-cylinder Yugo engine. Like you can max it out all you want, and you're just not going to go that fast. And then there's even some interesting stuff with, I can't remember the guy who, he was an up and coming, I think it was a rider for the Tour de France who had one of the highest VO2 maxes ever measured. And their prediction was that, oh my God, this guy's going to be like the next Tour de France winner. But his lactate threshold was relatively low. I think the argument was, okay, it just hasn't really been trained. And sounds like they did some intelligent training, but could never get his lactate threshold to be ridiculously high to match his VO2 max. So there's some really weird case studies where it seems like you can't have the best of both worlds. Like you can't have a near world record VO2 max and ridiculously high lactate threshold. And you've got other riders who have, again, these are all elite level people would have just absolutely freaky numbers anyway, have a little bit lower VO2 max, still absolutely high, but seem to be able to get a lactate threshold much higher too. I think if it was sprinting, there's some stuff where you can either have a really good acceleration phase, but then your ability to hold top speed might not be as good. And then when you train your acceleration phase, your top speed tends to go down a little bit. Again, this is at the elite of the elite level. So at the end, when it seems like you've maxed everything out, there's these appears to be these trade-offs that kind of limit your absolute performance when you get near the end for some reasons.
Yeah, I've never looked into that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I have no idea why, but awesome. And if you want to be found, where can people find more about you?
Okay, wait, I will add. Are you overtraining or are you undereating?
Oh,
So,
yeah. Nutrition's a big
If you're
component.
not recovering from high intensity exercise, then you're probably just not feeding yourself enough calories and carbohydrates.
Yeah. Quick side note, I have seen that if people are really pushing VO2 max adaptations, for God's sakes, don't do it in a caloric deficit, because I've seen it just tank people's outputs like much more than I would have ever believed. So I would double underscore that one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm most active on Instagram, probably Kristi Storoschuk, and I'm on LinkedIn, X. If you just look up my name, you'll find me. And I think I'm the only Kristi Storoschuk.
Okay. Awesome. And we'll put links to all of that. And thank you so much for all the great stuff. And thank you so much for doing all your research and publishing that in the literature. And I think it's open access, correct? So people can download it?
I think I have the full text linked in my bio on Instagram.
Okay. Yeah. So they can definitely get it from there. So people can go read all the data themselves. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That was great.
Thanks, Mike. It was great to come back. Yeah.
Awesome. I know you got to run to your meeting, and hopefully the first part worked well, and fingers crossed, and I'll let you know.
Yeah, let me know.
That was weird. I've never had that happen before, because I always set it to auto record because I get so paranoid about, well, maybe it was just a slight glitch in the internet or something like that. So
yeah, hopefully it just like conked out for a sec and then rejoined. I don't know.
Yeah, but
all
right.
Let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll see you.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We really, really appreciate it. Huge thanks to Kristi for spending her valuable time with us, discussing the pros and cons of Zone 2. We'll put a link to her paper, which is really, really good review. If you're looking for a one-stop review of Zone 2 training, I would highly recommend that you check it out. And if you are interested in her info, we'll have all of her links down below. And then if you want her top 4 tips for better aerobics for lifting meatheads, you can sign up to the Flex 4 down below also. It's completely free, and that'll put you on the Fitness Insider news list from me, and you'll get a lot more great info in addition to the past top 4 items from many of the other previous podcast guests. Again, that content only goes out to the fitness insiders there, but it's completely free to join. So thank you so much for listening. If you want more from myself or Kristi, we'll be at the International Society of Sports Nutrition this June down there in wonderful, usually hot and humid Florida at that time of year. So we'll put a link to that conference below. And as always, thank you so much for listening. We really, really appreciate it. Any comments or anything else, please let us know. If you enjoyed this episode, please forward it to someone or share it online and tag both of us so we can say thank you. And as always, we'll have much more information coming up. You can do us a favor and give us the old likes and subscribe and download and even leave us a review on the iTunes and Spotify and whatever platform you're listening to. Goes a long way to really help us with organic distribution of the podcast to keep growing the listener base. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Talk to all of you next week.
Did you see that? Yes, the frog is certainly taking a beating on this show. Yeah, it's hard to feel sorry for him. We take a beating every show.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.